Hey guys, a really nice game to share with you. This is actually a daily game with a 1 day time limit against the chess.com buddy No Stow Dan. I was rated in the 800 to 900 in daily, and I've got the white pieces. So this is a really nice example of what to do in the middle game. A lot of beginners and improving players seem to struggle with now, okay, I've completed development, now what do I do? How do I start to build an attack? So there's some really nice tactics in here. It gets really sharp towards the end, and I think you'll enjoy this. So let's dive in. So I've got the white pieces. I start with e4, e5, and knowing me, of course, we have the Vienna game. So knight to c3, knight comes out as well to defend. And this now opens the door for the Vienna gambit with f4. And here we don't have the gambit accepted, which would be e takes f4, but instead the other knight comes out. Okay. Now this then opens up the possibility of the Vienna Halloween line, which I've made another video about, so you can check that out. So f takes e5, which makes sense anyway for a bunch of reasons. I mean, yeah, we're attacking this knight, but the pawn's actually undefended there. But we've now captured a central pawn, that's one of the d or e pawns, with a wing pawn, which are the c and the f pawns, okay? So even if I lose this pawn, I'm going to have two central pawns to black's one central pawn, okay? Another thing you'll notice is it half opens up the f file, so now there's no white pawns on the f file. And if I castle kingside, my rook's going to end up on that file and could have attacking opportunities as well. So knight takes e5 is pretty obvious, and now you strike out in the middle with d4. This is the so similar to the Halloween gambit. Okay, so we attack the knight retreats to its natural square, which is pretty obvious. g6 is also an option. Now here you push e5, you do not push d5. And there are two options. So this is actually very similar now to the Vienna gambit, okay? Because this knight here, after we push this, his knight is under attack, okay? And it can't go here because of my knight. Can't go here or here because of my queen, right? Can't go there or there or there or there because of my knight as well. So the only actual square left for this guy is to retreat all the way back to where he started from on g8. Now, something that you'll find if you play the Vienna gambit and end up in this situation is that there's really only two playable moves. Either the knight retreats to g8 or the queen steps forward in front of the king, effectively pinning this pawn against your king. Okay. Now, in normal situations, this knight is not out. Okay. So if you're just playing the normal Vienna gambit, that knight's not there. So in the normal Vienna gambit, you can play queen to e2. So when this queen steps in front, you just block it with your queen, and the knight's problem is still there, and the knight is going to have to retreat all the way back to g8. Okay, because now you can capture, and then you may trade queens, but that's fine. Okay, now you can't do that in this line, it's different. So, and I've done this before, I've made this mistake by playing queen e2, but that simply undefends this pawn that is under attack by the knight on c6. So you can't do that here. So what I do here is I block with the light square bishop. And now there is no pin on this pawn, so now the pawn is able to capture the knight. The knight's going to have to retreat all the way back home to g8. So we have the upper hand from the opening already. We've got these two nice advanced pawns. All black's remaining pawns are still in the starting blocks. Black has two developed pieces, but one is the queen. And white has two developed pieces. So we have a slight advantage, and that's what chess is about. Okay, so bring out the other knight. This is important. When the f pawn is gone, then this diagonal is open towards the king, and you do not want the queen coming in with check. There's all kinds of horrible things that can happen there. Apart from anything else, there's going to be two attackers on this pawn and only one defender, unless the knight has come out. So this knight f3, very important for guarding these squares, also guards that pawn. Okay. So now we have d6 pushed, a knight capture, queen captures, and now knight to b5, attacking the queen but also looking at c7. And if my knight gets to there, I'm forking the king and the rook. So the only defender of that pawn right now is the queen. So the queen has to move, but has to move to another square where she is still guarding the c7 pawn. But what we have in this instance instead is a counter-attack. This is a counter-attack with check. And it looked at first as though this is a fork potentially winning the knight, but of course the knight is defended by my light square bishop. So there are options here. You know, I could push c3, I could push bishop d7, although that undefends this pawn. So in the game I do push the bishop, because the queen can't really capture this pawn. You know, everything else is defended because I'll come in, force the king to move, and win a rook. So that's not on the card. So the queen has to retreat anyway. So it wasn't really an attack with teeth. So now I castle, getting my rook onto this semi-open file here. And I've got a distinct lead in development. With black having just moved the queen twice, that really has cost him tempi. Okay, so we have bishop flies out to attack my knight to a degree, but it's not a serious attack. I'm not worried about that. So I develop my bishop now, hitting black's queen. Remember, the queen has to defend this pawn still, but now can't go on either of these two squares. So we have knight comes back out from g8 to block the attack. But again, if I capture this, the queen can't capture because again, knight comes in. It's a very, very common theme in the Vienna. It comes up a lot with having a knight either on b5 or on d5 looking at this vulnerable pawn. Okay, so I capture the knight, queen cannot recapture. So we have g takes. And now black has a problem. He's not castled his king, king's not safe, and now he's got doubled isolated pawns on the f-file, no g-pawn. Where's the king going to find safety? So I now strike out in the middle with c4. It defends my knight, maybe supports more pushes there. My king's already on this side of the board, so I'm quite happy to start throwing these pawns up and mess up the queen side. The king, I don't think is going that way. If he's going to find safety, he's going to have to be castling long. Okay, so why not get a head start and start forcing the issue by pushing pawns up the board? We do have castles. Now d5 is natural, hits the knight. It's not really an attack because I can't take because I lose my queen. But the knight moves anyway. Okay, and yeah. So this is interesting. The knight didn't actually have to move. And this is one of those differences between the sub 1000 and over 1000, I think is quite common. Black, I think, especially on a daily game, didn't really think it through that I can't capture that knight as things stand, right? Yeah, if I move my queen out of the way, then the knight is under attack. But right now, the knight is not under attack. And you have to notice the knight is the only defender of this pawn. So the knight moves out of the way. Not a problem. I grab a7 with check. King moves. Knight simply comes back. Okay, so now we've punched a hole in black's defense on the queen side there. We have knight takes, bishop takes. Fair enough. Bishop takes, queen takes. Okay, so now look at the situation on the board. Okay, there's some thin defense around my king. My king's not too bad. Black's king, looking at king safety first, also not too bad, but you know, there is this hole here and there is a queen on the loose, and that hole is still guarded by the knight that punched the hole in the first place. Okay, so black plays bishop to g7 with ideas of maybe moving this pawn and at some point eyeing down on that rook maybe, so we need to keep an eye on that. I now move my queen just one square back to f2. Looks like a very quiet move, but in fact is quite aggressive because now it puts the queen on this diagonal. So now I'm eyeing up queen a7 check and trying to come in for the kill. we have h5 pushed, and now the queen comes in with check, right? Now this is not a decisive attack, but I figured it was worth a prod because I think at the very least I'm going to win this pawn, okay? So now if queen a8 check, there's only one move for the king. King has to go to d7. Now I grab the pawn, and now things get really sharp. This was a scary move by black. Remember, this pawn is undefended, this pawn is undefended. The knight is defended only by that undefended pawn, and I'm in check, right? So, king h1, move out the way. The queen could grab this pawn now, but instead black decides to push this f-pawn, opening up the bishop looking at this undefended pawn and also the rook that's behind it. So now I have to, balance the kind of aim of attacking, because I would like to win the game with checkmate, but also I have to bear in mind that my king is somewhat vulnerable on the back rank there. Okay, I also have undefended pieces on the board, so I have to judge this very carefully. So anyway, I grabbed this loose pawn, and clearly now I'm attacking this pawn on f7. If I capture that pawn, that comes with a fork, so I'm checking the king and attacking the bishop, so I would win material. Black can't have that. Rook to f8 to defend the pawn. Now I double up my rooks. Okay, doubling down with rooks, very common, very simple, very effective a lot of the time. Now the queen grabs the pawn, and this comes with quite a serious threat. So right now, my rooks are paired on the f-file. But should I, for example, takes, yeah? Queen takes f1, checkmate, is a very real risk, right? So I've got to have that as primary, outlined many times in red, in my mind, have to bear this in mind, okay? So I capture the pawn on f7 with check. Now, if the rook captures, okay, I have rook takes, again with check. And then, so I think for some reason rook captures is not really an option here. Let me figure out why. So if rook takes there, I've got rook takes with check, wins the queen, wins the bishop there, but there's still this risk of queen f1 mate. Okay, so I think maybe an exchange of rooks would have been okay there, but still actually, as long as I keep my rook on the f-file, I'm still guarding the f1 square. Okay, so anyway, the king now moves back to e8, and it's getting very, very precarious. Okay, so what move would you play as white, which effectively, well, wins material and pretty much wins the game? Okay, there's lots of options here. These rooks have to stay paired because king takes rook is an option. We've got possibly queen c6, check would force the queen to capture, pawn recaptures. We may be okay there, but in fact, no, in that situation, rook takes rook, and if I recapture, I simply lose a rook. So that doesn't really work. So the move that I found was, and this is important when you're getting into situations like this, king's just moved himself to there. King can't capture that rook because it's defended, and can't go to any of these squares, so the king is out of squares. So I have a nice check here, right? Knight takes c7 check. The king's in check and can't move to any of these squares, so the only legal move has to be to delete the knight. So we have queen takes c7, and now queen takes queen, and I'm now up a queen. Okay, rook takes there, queen e7 is checkmate. So lovely, lovely sharp finish, and you can see. Let's just review quickly again now that we've seen the game. the Halloween line in the Vienna, which I love to see this. Correct blocking with the bishop, not the queen. Knight has to retreat, develop, and defend. All good. We have some trading, pressure on the queen. This was unfortunately ill-conceived, I think, because it allows me to develop the bishop, and black cannot capture the pawn. So he's lost 2 turns there. Okay. If you look at it here, at this point it's black to play. He's got 2 pieces out on the board, white's got 3 pieces out on the board. Okay, so black's slightly behind, needs to be continuing with development. Okay, but after this, okay, queen goes back, black has 2 pieces out on the board, white now has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces out on the board. Okay, so instead of using that turn to develop their own pieces, black has actually invited his opponent to develop a piece for free, and then has to retreat the queen. Okay, so it's just these small calculations in the opening phase of the game can make a huge difference. All right, so white castles, attack the queen, block the attack, queen cannot recapture. Okay, this is just relatively simple calculation. Yeah, you need to take the time to calculate these things. Okay, if I put my knight there and bishop takes, can queen take? Well, no. It's, that's not rocket science. You can figure this stuff out if you take the time and put in the effort to figure it out. So pawn must recapture. Now we have pawn push, king castles, and now this again, slight miscalculation. Pawn can't take the knight because the queen falls. Okay, so this knight, the attack on the knight is not a genuine attack. So at this point, for example, king b8 is playable. It stops the knight capturing there. He didn't have to move the knight straight away, but he moved the knight, lost the pawn, king had to move, knight retreats, we have some trading off, queen drops back. You have to spot the threat here. Why did my opponent play that move? You have to come up with, especially when you're playing a daily game, right? Have to come up with an answer for that question. Why did my opponent make that move? Why would white move the queen from f3 to f2? Okay, and do not proceed with your thinking until you have at least a working hypothesis for that question. Okay, well, it's clear. Queen's coming into there. Now h5 doesn't really help much. Queen comes in. Again, the king gets kicked around. We've lost another pawn. Now it gets sharp. And the game finishes pretty quickly, but I have to be so careful with this rook. Right, if this rook comes off the f-file, then it could be game over. It would be mate in 1. If the rook gets itself swapped off, I have to be very careful because then that is a real danger. So, check. Now this issue, this is a funny old issue. Yeah, why didn't white play this? Let's just, let's say we could check the analysis, but there's no analysis option on here. Okay. Why did black not simply exchange here? Let's see. If rook takes, we have rook takes, check. King can't go there, can't go there, can't go there. King only has, can't go there. King only has one option. So king has to move here, right? And then I think queen there is not really an option. Also, but also, rook takes bishop isn't an option because black has mate on f1. So I actually think that black could probably have captured there. But again, actually still we have... No, because the rook is on prise here. So queen there is not really an option. Queen takes, and then I lose the rook. Pretty much lose the game. So I think maybe, the answer to that is a miscalculation. I think Black probably could have captured the rook quite happily, but instead moved back. And then this actually loses the queen because the only legal move is queen takes knight. And with that, I mean, there's very little, very little that Black can do here. Checkmate is probably going to come on the next move, whatever happens. So I've also got rook e1 here. So it captures a pawn and it's checkmate and all over. But yeah, really nice finish, I thought. And I thought there's some interesting tactical ideas and really those key things about, I think one real takeaway for this, for sub 1000 players is, for example, that the pawn attack on the knight. The knight was not in immediate danger, so did not have to move. And that then allowed my knight to capture the pawn with check, just opened up the whole position there. So yeah, a couple of things to take away from that. Hope it's been interesting and useful for you. Thank you for watching. Do appreciate your support, and I'll see you soon.